My dad told me all those years ago when I was a little kid, he got off the phone one day and he had to deliver some bad news, business news, right? Tell a guy a mistake he had made. And he said, the best thing you can do for somebody is tell them the bad news. Because if you only show up with good news, then people don't know when to believe you. So he taught me early on by his own example that when you can't do something, say that you can't. When you do something wrong, say you did it wrong. If you made a mistake, clean it up as best you can. And then those people, you will earn their trust over time.
Welcome back to MasterMined. I'm your host, Mark Scrivener, and joined, as always, with my fabulous co-host, Jeff Skillen. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Mark. Great to be here.
Yeah, and Lee Pepper. Lee, thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Mark. Always love coming to East Nashville.
Awesome. Well, hey, listen, we're shooting this a day after Veterans Day, and I just wanted to give a shout out to all the veterans out there supporting the country and protecting us, especially the ones that actually work in this industry. And there are a lot that support this industry and work in it. So, thank you for all you do. And Lee, special thank you for our co-host who's been in the military and protected this country, and thank you for all you've done.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah. Well, today we're talking with Steve Lee, Senior Director of Strategic Relationships at Cumberland Heights, whose decades in leadership and personal recovery experience have made him a powerful bridge between clinical excellence and genuine human connection. Steve, welcome to the show, man. It's great to have you here today. I'm excited about this episode.
Mark, I'm thrilled to be here with you guys. To be with you, with Jeff and Lee is going to be great fun for me. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, hey, as we get this thing kicked off, maybe if you could just take the audience through your personal journey.
Well, how long's the podcast, Mark? You've
wow. This is going to be a serial.
The door pretty broadly there.
Maybe we can keep it abbreviated, Steve.
Now, you know what? I will try to do so. But, yeah, Mark, I'll be happy to tell you a little bit about how I got from where I started to this seat today. And I grew up locally here in Smyrna. And while I've lived a number of different places over the years, I've been back here in Nashville and Middle Tennessee since 1997. Professionally, my whole career up until 2013 was in a family business. Now, that was a sales and marketing business that took on several different forms over the years. We had to reinvent ourselves about every 5 years, as entrepreneurs often have to do. My dad had been a quintessential traveling salesman in the 50s, 60s, and into the early 70s when he passed away suddenly at 47 years old in 1972. I was 18, my older brother was 22, and my brother took over that business. And I rolled into it 3 years later at 21, and so we did everything from travel around the Southeast selling furniture, but quickly, frankly, moved into mostly consumer electronic products. So interestingly, at least to me, we navigated a landscape that really began in the late 70s with the advent of the video game business, and worked with Atari in their very beginning days. That evolved into Nintendo in the 80s, and in the late 80s we rolled into the personal computer industry. So we saw all of those take place where we called on what we'd called everything from what had started as little regional chains back in the day to the big box retailers like Walmart, Sam's, Costco, Target, and worked with all of those folks. Evolved in the early 2000s to traveling to Asia and doing product sourcing and helping people find manufacturing in Asia. So I went to China over 22 times and then met you, actually, Mark, when my brother and I and our other partners were starting doing a startup on a company called Elevar, and came to Snapshot for some support, and we put in that it was one of the startups that I say we got to start but not the up, Mark. And so 3 years of sweat equity, I rolled out of that and said, hey, what do I want to do now? I was 58 years old, and didn't need to be king of the world anymore. I was at a different place in my personal life as well. My daughter was grown, and I said, how do I want to spend my time? What's important to me? Who do I want to spend it with? And that eventually led me into this field. And we can talk a little more about that as we go along.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. And we did talk right before the episode. You were one of our very first clients at Snapshot. You helped us get up and off the ground. So thank you. And it's interesting that our paths reconnected here. So thanks again.
All right. So, Steve, I'm going to go off book here just a little, because as you were telling me the story, I'm going to take a leap of faith here. So just hear me out here. Given that background, as you're describing it, and we're going to get into what you're doing in the industry here, I'm going to guess that the way your dad was a traveling salesperson and then you were an entrepreneur, I'm going to guess that you listened to a lot of Zig Ziglar tapes over the years.
I did not.
You did not?
I was remarkably uninformed and lacked curiosity as well.
Fascinating. Okay. All right, so that was a complete whiff on my part.
No, well, I will tell you, and it's interesting because I know some of the areas that you guys want to go down conversationally today. And the truth is that my brother and I, as I look back, we really bootstrapped everything. We had no formal training. It was all hit or miss and suit up and show up and just be consistent, and often they hit a dead end. But we look back now and frankly see all the opportunities we left on the table, but not in a regretful way, because we just know that we just got up in the morning and went and did what we did. And I look back, we got Lee here with us, and you, Jeff, who work with sales teams all the time, work with business development teams, have refined processes, and we would have benefited so greatly from some of that, but we did not have it, nor did we make it available to the people that worked with us as well. So it was really just get up and go. And though I don't want to shortchange the job that we were able to do, and I really tip my cap to my brother, who was the rainmaker in our group and the driving force at a very young age. But we just went after it.
I think part of the reason that I asked that question, I wasn't going for the laugh necessarily, is because you're a fantastic communicator, Steve, and it's like I've seen you in speaking situations, and it just reminds me of sales training. It reminds me of I think it's that persistence, and I think it's what you just described that is so impressive, and it just shows up. And not only that, it's like every day we get an opportunity to remake ourselves. Every day we get a chance to reaffirm who we are. Every day we get an opportunity to look at this with optimism or look at this with pessimism. And I know how you view the world, and so that's why I just made a leap that chances were pretty high that you were filled in with other stuff, but it sounds like you got that on your own. Is that fair?
Well, if you'll allow me to share a little bit of a personal story, that the truth is that, and you guys know that I'm in recovery from drug addiction and alcoholism since 1989. I was always kind of an average guy and kind of a screw up, right? Not a bad kid, but not a high achiever by any stretch. When finally I was rolling into this family business, that's where people thought that I would thrive and do well, because I was fairly personable and I didn't seem to have a lot of trouble talking to people. But I will tell you guys that for several years I was a sales guy who couldn't make sales calls. I was a guy that pulled up into a small southern town at the time where you would tear out the yellow pages to identify who you were going to go call on, right, and make cold calls. And I would sit out in front of a place and not be able to go in and not understand why I couldn't go in and have that fear and not share that with anyone, and then go to the next place and not go in. I would go as far sometimes as to sit out in the car, typically in those days, and in the South, it would be a little town square like we have in Franklin, like you see in Columbia, like you see in other towns. And the furniture store there were usually 2 furniture stores, and they were always, owner-operated, family businesses. I'd wait for the guy to leave. I'd see him walk out to go to lunch, go in and ask for him, knowing he wasn't there. Leave my card and say, tell him I came by. And I would go back often to check in at the time, what were little motor lodges, right? And often populated by other traveling sales guys. And during that kind of dark period, early period, I might drink or get high and vow to do better tomorrow. And get up the next morning and often struggle with the same thing. So it was really a difficult time for me because I also carried that with me. I would, we weren't logging into Salesforce, putting our activities in, right? I'm going to call in the end of the day and maybe talk to my brother and talk about what the day had been, right? And I'd have to make that stuff up. And so it was really a challenging, difficult time for me. And by the way, for my brother, for the guys that I worked with, because I'm a guy that, they couldn't fire me because I'm family and didn't know what to do with me. And that was true for longer than I'd like to admit. And then I found sobriety in 1989, and it was a real shift in me being able to show up for life in a different way.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Jeff. I love that story because I think I first met you around 2013. I think you came over to Foundations. And, one of the things that I always admire is that you were transformational. And that's something that we've talked about on the show a lot. Like a lot of times I think smaller programs that are trying to get that up on their start, they somehow fall into the transactional nature, but you've always been transformational. And when you mentioned logging in the activity in Salesforce, it made me think back to, when you think about the success of Bill W., and the 12-step fellowship, there's no technology there, right? It's transformational. It's the relationship is transformational. And that's what I find you being so successful. You might call yourself a dinosaur, but that is, it's really that transformational nature first, not worrying about the transactional part.
Well, it's one of the things I've been very grateful for since I've been in the behavioral health industry and in the roles that I've had, is that I made that career shift, and we can talk more about how that happened in a little while, but I was 58 years old. And of course, I still needed to earn a living. I didn't need to make a fortune, but I needed an income. So to stop and try to figure out what am I going to do, right? Mm-hmm. And but one of the things that's been true for me, where I thought perhaps that my age would be an impediment, I made the decision with guidance and help with some other people to lean into that rather than turn away from it, to try to look and say, what is the value that I bring to something? Not what's the role that needs to be filled, but where's their value here and how can I hopefully bring that value and be a value add somewhere. And I'm really grateful that at least for the last 12 years or so, people have seen enough value to keep me employed and mostly doing things that I am really grateful to be able to do with people that I'm very fortunate to be able to do it with.
I think your story is going to be so relatable to people that are listening to this podcast and inspirational too. And I know that that's not your intent, but I do think people are going to hear that story and they'll be like, wow, I know of Steve Lee, or I know Steve Lee. I don't necessarily know all of that backstory, but boy, I can relate that to my own story and it's like in the humility and the transparency of talking about the challenge of making those sales calls. It's like, yes, we do train people to do sales and it's something that we enjoy doing, and everyone has to get to that intersection in their life. And so I think, thank you for sharing it with that level of transparency. And I was looking at this conversation, if you look at the driving ethos behind this podcast, I like to think that it's this nice combination of smart, heart, and art. Okay. So it's like, we talk to a lot of smart people. You're definitely one of those. We talk to people who bring a lot of heart to what they do. You're definitely one of those. And then there's the art of, and I think you just touched on that in your what you set up here is like, how do I bring myself to this as opposed to how do I just fill a role? And that's almost an art sort of angle. So would you mind digging into that if I've set you up well?
Yeah. Well, it was an interesting transition, and I had a friend of mine that set up a meeting for me with a venture capitalist, with a guy who had just sold a business for over $37 million. And he said, Steve, I want you to go talk to this guy. And he's a very eclectic guy. I won't drop his name here, but he said, because one of the things that venture capitalists can do is recognize the value in something. He said, so I just want you guys to have a conversation. And the guy reached out to me. We decided, he told me when to come by. And he said, but I want you to go through an exercise before you come. And he said, you can go on my website and see how I did the same exercise, and you can see how I answered it. He said, but I want you to ask yourself 3 questions. One is, what do you love? The other is, what do you value? And the third is, what are you great at? He said, look, there's going to be 2 or 3 quick things we all say. He said, there's the right answer, right? There's the right answer, family and recovery and whatever. And what are my values? Well, he said, everybody's going to have some. He said, what I want to encourage you to do is go a level deeper. Really personalize those questions. And maybe answer them like you might ask a man in recovery who's doing a self-examination, to go that level deeper. What do you really love? Mm-hmm. What are the values that are non-negotiable? That to compromise them would make you would take a toll on you. And he said, and the third one is, what are you great at? He said, we are reticent to assign greatness to ourselves. He said, well, I'm pretty good at this and I'm pretty good at that. But he said, is there something you're great at? And he said, let's talk about that. Well, that was a fascinating exercise, and it didn't take me directly to something, but it narrowed the target dramatically, and it took a lot of things off the board. He said, if you love something and you're great at it, but you're doing it at a place or with people who don't share your values, that's not going to work. And he said, that doesn't make them wrong. It just means that it's incompatible. Mm-hmm. It's not a good or bad, right or wrong, but you just don't align with it. The alignment has been so critical for me. And I know as we talk later, the role I have today and being able to work at Cumberland Heights, I feel so aligned with who and what Cumberland Heights is, matches who and what I try to be. Then he connected me with a woman that worked in his company. I don't want to name her either, but to call her what we might today call, a career coach or a life coach or executive coach would be a disservice. She typically worked with boards of directors in Fortune 500 companies to help them think past and out of the box. And she agreed to spend some time with me. And that was really valuable. And she had me do some things that were just terribly uncomfortable for me. And but like most things in my life, I doubt it was the things she had me do that was critical. It was the willingness to do it.
Yes.
That probably made the difference. And so those things kind of got me pointed in a direction. And then the decision I made that you just talked about, I think, is when that next thing I made a commitment to myself to do was what I'm going to do is show up as exactly who I am to the extent that I can, to bring this package and see how that works. Because, see, I'd been in this family business for 38 years, and it had been a wonderful opportunity and lots of high-flying moments and lots of real challenges like anybody has. But in any relationship, sometimes you find yourself, whether it's a marital relationship, a friendship, a professional one, you can find yourself in a role that you then get stuck in. One of the lines I use today is I try hard not to be held captive to my old story about myself, that we can continue to be transformational. We can continue to evolve and grow. And so I had to stop and go, okay, who is this guy right now? What really is important to me? and kind of make decisions and maybe some risk based on that, rather than just try to figure out what looks or sounds right to somebody else.
Steve, I'm loving this conversation. I mean, everybody I've met out there has such a high regard for you in this space. And, taking it back to like the early days, I mean, you sold furniture, you sold video games, and then you pivoted to the behavioral health space. Maybe take us back to that time and talk about like some of the bigger like challenges that you faced learning this and getting into your role in this space.
Well, to be honest, I was very resistant to getting into this space. I had because of being very active in my own personal recovery, and I traveled around nationally doing some things for that as well as locally, and knew an awful lot of people. And a lot of those people were also involved professionally in the treatment space. So I had been approached by folks about potentially getting involved, but I was very reticent. I had some concerns about whether my the lines that need to be drawn between personal recovery and the business of treatment. I had some prejudices that were based on limited information. I was going to say bad information, but a lot of it was true. It just wasn't. It was not broadly true. It was anecdotally true, and so I just had concerns because nothing has been more important than my personal recovery, and the opportunity that presents to hopefully be helpful to other people. And I didn't want to do anything to jeopardize what had been the most and is the most fulfilling part of my life. But as I met with the woman that I was just speaking about, and she took me through a number of exercises and asking questions, and again, some of them around the things that we just talked about, versions of what do you love, what are the values, she said, Steve, all roads are leading over here. She said, so do you think you can find some peace with what you may view as seeming conflicts? Well, and so I, independent of that, I had a guy reach out to me that was working as trying to fill roles for a company that was locally here in Nashville, and sounded me out. He says, I don't know what your current situation is, but is this something that you might find interesting? And the timing just seemed such that it seemed serendipitous. So I believe less in coincidences and more in things kind of lining up these days. And so I said, let's talk about it. And so I did end up taking that role. Yeah. And it was a business development role with a company that was based in Brentwood. And I, without going into detail, I found that I enjoyed the job, but I wasn't aligned in the way that I needed to be aligned. And again, that's not I'm not casting aspersions on that company and great people that I met and great experiences I had, but ultimately it wasn't lining up for me. But it did open that door that then led to some other opportunities.
One thing about this industry and then healthcare in general, those referral networks are the lifeblood of any program. And what we like to say on this podcast is that, people refer to people, not necessarily to programs. So I see you as being supremely effective at developing and maintaining those relationships. You may or may not agree with that, but it's like that's how I perceive it. How do you look at that relationship building, and then how do you maintain that fine ethical line so that all of those things line up for you and you're building a relationship?
Well, I think as long as one of the decisions that I made that is in alignment with my recovery is to make decisions based on principle rather than thoughts, feelings, and beliefs, right? So spiritual principles always point true north, regardless of the terrain, right? Mm-hmm. I say, so whether you're on the mountain or down in the valley, north is north. Whether you're in the rainforest or in the desert, north is north. So whether you're talking for something so the stakes don't change the principle.
Mm-hmm.
So that became, can I hold the line? Can my principles hold the line independent of who it seems to serve? Independent. So I hope that over time what I have tried to do is play the long game. And I went, when I was a few months sober, I went to my sponsor in recovery, and we talk about practicing these principles in all our affairs, right, in our 12th step. And I said, Frank, I believe practicing these principles in all my affairs is putting me at a competitive disadvantage in the marketplace. I'm not sure everybody got the memo.
No, you're getting right to the heart of my question here, so this is great.
And he said at the time, he said, well, Steve, he said, only seemingly so. He said, if you're telling me that there might be a particular deal that you don't get because you're unwilling to turn a blind eye or shave a corner or even entertain in a particular way, he said, absolutely. He said, but I'm telling you, he said, first of all, you don't have any idea the number of people who have quietly chosen not to do business with you. Not even necessarily because of the way I was drinking and my lifestyle. He said, but just maybe the vibe you're putting, just not my kind of guy. And he said, if you will commit to consistently doing the next right thing, over time, the people that are supposed to find their way to you will. He wasn't promising me that I was going to be, president of a Fortune 500 company, and I am not. But he did say, he said, and you'll be able to put your head on the pillow at night. So being able to hold, when you compromise once in a while, right? Well, then that there's no consistency to that. Mm-hmm. But I have no question that there are opportunities that haven't gone my way because at least I've held to my principle, which might not have made the other person wrong again. I think that's always important to say. I'm not challenging somebody. I'm just saying that this is the approach. My dad told me all those years ago when I was a little kid, he got off the phone one day and he had to deliver some bad news, business news, right? Tell a guy a mistake he had made and something that wasn't happening. And he said, the best thing you can do for somebody is tell them the bad news. Because if you only show up with good news, then people don't know when to believe you. So he taught me early on by his own example that that when you can't do something, say that you can't. When you do something wrong, say you did it wrong. If you made a mistake, clean it up as best you can. And then those people, you will earn their trust over time. And I hope that that's what I've tried to consistently bring to my work in the behavioral health field. I often make mistakes, but none of them are on purpose. None of them are strategic mistakes.
Steve, before I started working at Foundations in behavioral health, I used to have this saying that I learned from my days working at Pro Systems, and it was bad news doesn't age well like a fine wine. Mm. And so when I got in behavioral health, I was using that line, and I forgot who it was. They said that's not really a good anecdote, or metaphor to use in behavioral health because, most drunks don't know what a fine wine is. You mentioned playing the long game, and I think Jeff and I have seen over our time that a lot of people that work in these business development, clinical outreach, sales roles, they struggle with this concept because there's always these pressures, especially for those companies that are maybe private equity backed. And I wonder, we see this carousel, we see this revolving door of people that are, coming and going and jumping around. But how have you lasted so long, really at Cumberland Heights? And how do you encourage or talk to people about holding their ground and playing that long game and not being pressured? to make these shortcuts
and making it acceptable, making it acceptable, and then getting management to understand that the long game wins.
Because there's got to be quarters that you weren't successful.
Well, I kid all the time. I've given talks to some business development teams over the years and been invited to talk to a group, and I'd say, look, I often say I believe every one of us showed up this morning with ethics and with principles. And I said, so I know I got first of the month ethics, but do I have end of the month ethics, right? I know I got first of the quarter, but what about, do I have bosses on my ass ethics? Do I have the mortgage is due ethics? Do I have, the pressure is on ethics? Can they withstand?
Yep.
But I also think that you were asking the question, I feel very blessed that at Cumberland Heights, I have never had to convince management, if you will, our leadership, because the leadership has never been. We are one of the lines we use a lot in business development is we're numbers informed, but not numbers driven, right? You've got to look. I was talking to the BD team a few years ago when I was director of business development, and we did set some goals for people, right? We set some goals, and it made a couple of people uncomfortable, and I understand because they go, look, we're about helping people, not heads in beds, right? And all of that is 100% true. But I said, but ultimately, what we have to do, we need to be good at what we do. So we know that Cumberland Heights is a great place to come. We know it's accessible. So if it's not happening, let's explore what the challenge is, what's getting in the way. And looking at this isn't to punish you or to try to figure out that you're not working hard. I start from believing everybody's working hard. So now let's figure out if we're working smart, if we're being effective, because you can work really hard but not be effective. And I said, doing the next right thing is a good business strategy. But we don't do it because it's a strategy. We do it because it's the next right thing. But ultimately, nobody's come down and have to meet quotas, if you will, or have we felt that undue pressure? Mm-hmm. Ultimately, if this isn't happening, then what are we not doing? What can we do to help you be successful? If somebody is not coming to Cumberland Heights, why aren't they coming? Is it a financial issue? Is it an insurance issue? Is it a quality of care issue? Is it a geographic issue? Or there's all these reasons. Do we know what they are? And then can we help either overcome the objections by helping somebody understand that we might be the best fit? It's real important to us at Cumberland Heights to start by saying we want to help the person that shows up at the front door. Without, again, casting too broad a net, I think there are two things that I've seen in treatment over the years. When I got sober 100 years ago, right, it would show up most places, and like almost every industry, things start as mom and pops, right? They start typically local. They start typically mission and heart driven. And treatment was the same way. People get sober somewhere or a loved one does. They go, we want to help people with that. Somebody shows up at the front door, and we try to figure out how to help that person. And over time, and when you look at reimbursement through the insurance industry, there are services that are now reimbursable. So somebody might choose to build out a program that is reimbursable, and the person that shows up at the front door might magically fit all of those resources. Now I will say this, I think that we have never had better treatment and more treatment available. More sophisticated treatment, it couldn't be better, and never has it been harder to find the right one for you and your loved one. Never has it been harder to navigate the terrain to see where is the best fit for me or for that person that we're trying to help. And for me, it's just been great at Cumberland Heights. We're real clear about who we are and what we do. I often kid that if you go to a restaurant that serves meatloaf and sushi, they're probably not doing one of them well. And I think we've got some places that
there goes lunch plans.
In some cases have a breadth of services, but it is really hard to provide the expertise and quality staff and to provide all of those like a Jersey diner, you know.
So Steve, I'm going to try to set this. I mean, I know the question I want to ask. I'm going to do my best to set it up for you. Okay. It is very impressive how the 12-step traditions have literally transformed that younger version of you and the person that shows up today. What I see with a lot of marketers, business development people who also have found recovery themselves, they want to lead with that story. And if you don't mind, talk a little bit about the pitfalls of doing so, and then how people should or should not incorporate their own transformation into a business setting.
Well, it's interesting that you asked that because one of the first things that was me, even at 58, but my presumption from the outside looking in would come in that my personal story was going to make all the difference. Now, it kind of depends on who's in front of you, right? But when you're going into a hospital setting, those people are trying to find help. They're trying to find it quickly. They're trying to find it efficiently. They're trying to help move maybe a patient that's in their care, either detoxing or has come into the emergency room that they've very quickly got to find placement for that person to help them get the help they need. They're not looking for my hour-and-a-half testimony, right? They're going, how can you help me? Mm-hmm. So there is a balance between somebody bringing their personal experience in their own recovery versus being able to really work and see what does this referral source need. What we want to do is show up with a solution to a problem or help for those that need the help. And with the referral source, it's important to understand what's important to them. What are their particular challenges? How can we solve their problem? How can we take this individual or family that they're working with and bring them into our care in a quick, efficient, effective way, rather than just go, I understand how you feel.
Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, one of the things that I like, I appreciate that answer. And one of the things that I try to convey to people regarding that question is selective disclosure is what I like to say. Let this be something that people discover a depth about you as opposed to you leading with that story. Because it's like you always want to have a reason for somebody to learn more about you and realize your depth and realize how much you have to offer. And the more you reveal appropriately, the deeper that relationship goes. But if you lead with that, it's almost like you've just, you spread all the toothpaste out of the tube, and then it's like, now what?
Well, I think in even the most well-meaning, particularly younger, newer person, it's a perhaps even unintentional way of virtue signaling, right? Mm-hmm. Let you tell me, or let me tell you where I've been, where I've come from. And again, we're in a professional environment, and that's the other thing. There's a real balance in bringing professionalism to the work that we do.
Mm-hmm. What if you were to give us a grade in terms of where we are on that professionalism spectrum?
You talking about this podcast?
Collectively, we're about a D.
Okay. So Steve, all right. So on one end you have meatloaf, and on the other end you have sushi. Okay. No, I mean if you were to give it kind of a grade in general, it's like, where do you think we are in terms of professionalism in this business development role as an industry?
I honestly don't feel qualified to give that answer to what I see, and Lee spoke to it a few minutes ago. One of the things that I think happens is that there's an awful lot of movement in the business development world. Mm-hmm. There are people who change jobs every 6 or 8 months and move to a different place. There's only so many times you can show back up in front of a referent and talk about now finally. I'm with the guys who really get it. And
it's like a different jersey, different business card.
Boy, I have read that LinkedIn post all the time.
And we kind of kid about it here, but I really want to acknowledge the individual is put in a tough spot, and we churn these people around some, right? And not everybody, that there is sometimes unreasonable expectations or high expectations. I'm not the guy in charge of what's reasonable and not, I guess. But when the way some people are able to pay, and look, if you're getting compensated at a certain level, there are going to be significant expectations that come with that compensation. And what looked good on the front end, you might not have but a 6-month runway, and then we got to plug somebody else in. And one of the things that I think we've got a great team at Cumberland Heights. We have added some new people over the last year. People are given, and we, again, understand that it takes some time. And while people are certainly held accountable for doing their job and hopefully doing it well, you're not going to get 6 months and out. If you're struggling, we're going to look at ourselves again and go, where are we failing you? Mm-hmm. How can we? And Lee has been a great help in coming out and working with our admissions and BD team and helping us get more effective at what we do. But it's a real churn and burn environment out there in admissions and business development with a lot of companies. So it can be tough.
So, I mean, would you encourage people to do the same sort of exercise that you did in terms of values and like in terms of finding the right spot? Or do you think that role is that's just the nature of the role?
Well, I think that both things can be true at the same time.
Well, let's go back to true north, right?
Yeah. When I end up having coffee with somebody, as they're people who want to have a conversation that might be making a change, I always encourage somebody to go through that exercise and say that this might not, again, lead directly to what you choose to do, and also never forget the very practical aspect of somebody's got bills coming due next month, right? So we can't just blindly say, follow your bliss. That's I'm a fan of that, but there's some real, the practical realities of sometimes having to do a job you're not crazy about. Sometimes there's nothing more noble than working hard at something you don't like to take care of the people you love.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. I think that, I guess it's been maybe 3 or 4 years ago when Jay, called me and said, can you meet me for breakfast at the Loveless Cafe? And I was like, oh, I wonder what this is about. Mm. And I think my time at Cumberland Heights, it was really just bringing in just a different perspective. And you all didn't embrace everything that I did, but I think it was transformational, to say, well, listen, here's some other ways to look at some of these problems that we're having. And then you can, it didn't change like your true north. It was just, learning to do some things maybe differently and a little bit more, in a little bit different approach. And I think that's what I wonder, your background going from all the sales, and the furniture and I think it's almost like you had an outside perspective. It's like you didn't always grow up in this space. And I think that's one of the things that's made you successful.
Well, I think one of the great things that I believe has been happening at Cumberland Heights over the last few years is I believe, represent this great combination of what you saw is key staff that have been there for 20 plus years, and that provides stability. It protects and culture, which I think is critically important. But sometimes we also only had that, we couldn't see outside our own fishbowl. Mm-hmm. And with a few people that left our leadership team, it created a opportunity to reevaluate that and to bring in some people, a couple of people in particular that I think have complemented the long-term stability and culture with different perspectives and new ideas. And so we hold the line of what's best about Cumberland Heights, but don't quit growing with the services and sophistication and how we go about the business that we're trying to do now. And I think maybe I've told Jay, and I really mean this, I think that his tenure as CEO is going to be looked back on of him really leaving a footprint for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah. You know, Steve, a lot of programs across the country, they have BD roles, but not everybody has the senior director of strategic partnerships role. And maybe you could, I'm sure the audience is probably thinking the same thing, but maybe you could tell us the difference or the evolution that you took, and then maybe what are some of those strategic partnerships that you work hard to like maintain and create?
Well, when I came to Cumberland Heights in 2019 and came on as the Director of Business Development, so over the business development team as it existed then, about 2 years into that, Jay asked me to meet him at Loveless Cafe, which
now
where he has all of these.
Now we know where Jay's spot
Yeah,
is.
that's right, because he's obviously getting his punch card done to get that free
He probably has a
ham
bunch-
breakfast.
I was going to say he's got a bunch of free breakfasts out there by now.
But Jay actually put forward the idea of changing my role. And I think, and to be fair, I think it was twofold in a really good way. But he said later that he wondered if I might view this as that I might choose to step away or might not embrace this role. But I'm sitting there as he's talking to me about the role, feeling like the Brer Rabbit getting thrown in the briar patch. You know, he was. And it was about, I believe, both bringing some different expertise into business development, like we're talking about, but also maybe maximizing that value that he saw in the role that I could play. And that meant and we had to come up with a name, Mark. Just we tell everybody that you should create a title for yourself that's so ambiguous no one can measure your effectiveness. And we kidded about the senior director that's not necessarily a rank. It's more a designation based on my age, I think. But the role really was both to represent Cumberland Heights on a national level. And so I tend to go to all of the national addiction conferences to carry our flag. I work with all of our collaborating partners around the country, other treatment programs. It's important, while Cumberland Heights is fairly regional in scope, we still probably get 70% of our program participants come from about a 300-mile radius, and that other 30% is some of that falls to me, right? And so some of those strategic relationships that you ask about is our work with the airlines, our work with professionals, healthcare professionals, our work with EAPs in different industries, labor unions, and interventionists. So most of those kind of fall under me with support from other staff, and so to try to develop those relationships, and that kind of require a consistent touch for those folks, and to have a particular understanding of their needs, and then it frees our business development team up regionally to go do what they do best.
Is it true one of your strategic initiatives for this year is the state of Hawaii? I think you were telling me.
I have submitted that on the 2026 budget, but so far that's not been approved. But I think it's an untapped resource.
So, Steve, you mentioned, and I would agree with you, that there are now more choices of quality options for people that are seeking treatment, no question. And we've talked a lot about successes in this conversation so far. What do you see as some of the challenges that we're going to be facing in the next few years, and how do you look at that?
Well, again, I'll be honest with you. I just don't feel qualified to give the type of answer that Jay Crossan would give if he were here, that Lee would give, and that you would give. Ask those same questions. What I'm able to do is really keep my focus narrow on Cumberland Heights, and again, go do what I do. And a lot of that has been from when I first started, again, a few years ago, 12 years ago, when I had a lot of opinions. My role doesn't require me to express those opinions globally. It is, hey, Steve, why don't I go do my old sponsor in recovery said, I called him one day on my way out to work complaining about something and somebody. And he said, well, here's what I'd like you to do, Steve. He said, figure out what your job is. Figure out what their job is. Figure out what God's job is, and let everybody do their job. So I'm really trying to focus on my job and do my job, and not get too caught up in the grand scheme of things. They need to be looked over. There are people whose job that is. I know where I fit.
Yeah. Steve, this has been such a great episode. Is there anything like maybe that we haven't asked you up to this point, or that you'd want to share with the audience that you think might be helpful?
Well, no one's yet told me what I get paid for this, Mark.
Checks in the mail. Checks in the mail.
No, we were going to
go. A gift card coming for you can take. Jay,
we were going to go. We were going to go to that. No. We were going to go to the Japanese meatloaf restaurant.
Right. Perfect. Well, you know what? I do want to say that I'm grateful to be on here. I have no idea. I will look later and see what I said while I was here. And I've probably said some things even I'm not willing to defend at this point. But I'm real grateful for the opportunity. I appreciate what you guys are doing, and in an effort to bring a lot of different voices on here. And that aren't competing with each other, but are complementing each other, all with the goal of improving our space and ultimately helping the man or woman that finds their way to needing our help. So I appreciate what you guys are doing.
Steve, thanks for joining us. And that's a wrap for today's episode. If today's episode sparked anything from leadership to business development to the behavioral health space in general, please subscribe, rate, and review this show so that we can reach more people. And from the MasterMined team, thank you, and we'll catch you next week.
That wraps up this episode of MasterMined. Thank you so much for joining us. And remember, MasterMined is not just a podcast, it's a community. So don't forget to comment, subscribe, and review us. Your feedback helps us continue to bring you content that's relevant and relatable. Thanks again to our sponsor, Snapshot, a digital media marketing agency. And thank you for joining us on MasterMined, your behavioral health playbook.